Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumberger channel. It's of course a show where each and every week we just take a different album, dive into it, generate a discussion about it, and look what's going on, right? So as you can no doubt tell from the opening, this is another return to the randomiser. It's the end of the month. We do a random episode based on your suggestions. So the randomizer for this month has spat out the suggestion from one Indigoblur, a rather long-time channel supporter actually, who suggested this particular album, amongst another, on our episode for I Became Birds by Home Is Where. So before we start, I just think it's kind of interesting that a comment on a video for what was fifth wave emo music, I believe it was, has resulted in us checking out this particular album. Something that is comparatively completely different in every single aspect, different music genre vibes, something that's just now, this is just like weird and uncomfortable to me. But that's what I think is fascinating though. This one, it's to me a very unsettling and peculiar album, and I think it's really interesting as a result though, despite it just leading me into this very dark, macabre place. This is the very point of it, I believe, something I'll try discussing in the course of this video, but we will see. So today, I present That's Harikiri by Sd Laika. So, of course, who is Sd Laika? Well, Sd Laika is the moniker for, regrettably, the now late Peter Runge, a electronic artist from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, who sadly passed away last year in 2023, it seems. So Runge's career in the world of electronic music, though, is one that feels like a rather brief flash in the grand scheme of things, only resulting in one full-length album, the one we're looking at today, and a collection of single and EP releases that were released, between the years roughly of around 2011 to 2018-ish. It seems, though, that the release of this very particular album we're looking at, though, is one that actually garnered the attention of, many different reviewing platforms, from the Pitchfork, Resident Advisor, and the Quietus, as well as actually getting a nod from the one and only Richard D. James of Aphex Twin, who in a rare interview in 2014 named Sd Laika as one of the more relatively new artists that he was currently listening to at that time. And so, what is That's Harikiri? Well, as mentioned, the debut studio album from Sd Laika, released in 2014 on Triangle, and adorned with an incredibly weird, to me, rather unsettling picture of a man's face, which apparently, though, is sourced from the 1964 short film Ori by Terayami Suji, which, of course, in typical weird music fashion, will be playing throughout this review at various points, of course. But yeah, this album, a very odd, rather deconstructed look at club music, it seems. It gives us a very rather skewed, distorted, and frankly, rather scary outlook into this very seedy underbelly of, dark alleyways behind the clubs and themselves, it feels. It's fascinating to me because you get such a peculiar palette of beats and electronics that pulse along rather arrhythmically for the most part, and it never creates a comfortable place for us to inhabit or even vibe out to, right? But rather it just, creates this unsettling, unnatural, and just really creepy place, that, it kind of just gives me the shivers for the most part. In any case, it's a little point to mention as well before we start, actually, though. It seems actually that this particular album, though, I found this out when looking up more info. Apparently, it was actually never really envisioned by Sd Laika as an actual release. And instead, it came about following the underground success of Sd Laika's previous EP release of Unknown Vectors, as well as it coming about from the request of the owner of the Triangle Record label to produce a follow-up to the Unknown Vectors EP. And it was then that Sd Laika dusted off some recordings, pushed out this very album of, various recordings that were just sort of underground, hidden away in Sd Laika history kind of thing. And what we got is a weirdly coherent album that's, very disorientating and very unsettling. And this album notes, although still embedded in that underground electronic music scene, it garnered a lot of attention and acclaim for Runge, as previously mentioned, and has since been very highly regarded, as a highlight amongst the grimy, dark, atmospheric electronic music genre, or whatever you want to call it. It's all very weird. It's a very fascinating album, one I'm excited to discuss today, so let's just get on with it, shall we? And so, opening up with the first track of Peace, we're given anything but it feels. This is a rather short track to just introduce us to everything, but it's a very confusing, dense, and heavy assortment of rather high-pitched frequencies, intense electronic drones that pulsate with a very menacing attitude, before you're given very brief vocal samples that are just drenched in effects, it feels. And of course, as mentioned, a very short little album opener here, but it's one that is incredibly apt in just immediately setting the scene for us. One that showcases to us, an album experience that will venture into the uncomfortable and the haunting. And so the next track of Great God Pan, it discontinues the rather unsettling vibes that we've been immediately introduced to, and you get a rather, a very peculiar melody of sorts, sourced from these rising drone effects, that fall in and around this deluge of electronic interference before being caught in this distorting effects that warp the tune into something a lot less melodic and much more terrifying. And just when you start to convince yourself that this is going to be the scene for the entire track, that we can just about get comfortable with this unsettling vibe, it all just seems to fade away into silence before leading the way again for a more minimal electron exploration of frequencies and interference again. And you get these almost percussive elements that start around, but they feel so fractured and so broken that it struggles to actually really push it along in a comfortable way, even as that melody reprises itself, accompanying rather hollow, empty electronic beats. What I find amazing, though, is the rather, empty, hollow atmosphere to this entire thing of what's being presented to us. It's a rather bleak and stark outlook at the world around us in this incredibly ugly glory. And to me, as mentioned, it feels so arrhythmic at times, just delving into confusion and formlessness, as it just creates and forms this really uncomfortable environment for us that, I don't think we want to be here, do we? It's just so, it's the kind of place where you glance upon it down the dark alleyway, you see something going on that just unnerves you, and all you want to do is run away. But this is just the vibe of the album, it feels, and the fact it perfectly expresses this is what makes it fascinating to me, I feel. Moving along though, we get the next track of Gutter Vibrations. So this one opens up with a rather interesting delay effect of sorts, it feels, as though the melody is attempting to push through the miasma of distortion, only to instead just come across as blurred and once again formless. As an assortment of peculiar clicks and beeps accompany everything, it feels, before giving room for those minimalist beats to just occupy the scene just for a few moments, it feels. And like a lot of what we've already been gotten so far, it feels oddly structureless to me, just pushing this assortment of distorted melodies and lowercase beats in a way that never adheres to conventional structures and instead just occupies its own narrative entirely as it bounces back and forth between such intermittent moments. Definitely a sort of deconstruction of everything, of the club music, of, that sort of constant 4/4 beat that you get in club music. This is just devolving it all into just the worst aspects of it, and it's amazing just how it gets under your skin, I feel. And I have to say, it kind of sounds like to me just very strung out electronic music, It's like all the makings of an Aphex Twin or even a Square Pusher album, but one that's immersed in such a rather depressing atmosphere, and it's one that feels like it has very little humour to it at all. all we have, for me, is just this negative mood to occupy, and as a result, it's such a peculiar, visceral, and oddly fascinating listening experience. So, next track of I Don't. This continues everything in much of the same fashion, albeit with a rather different sound palette, of course. Like, every track kind of pulls you into that same sort of soundscape, but with very different sounds. This one, though, you kind of get an intense electronic beat forming, but it never devolves into that intense electronic rave that you want to inhabit, but instead, it just hovers around so slowly, before you're then accompanied by more arrhythmic beats and repeating vocal samples of just the word black that just comes in at random points almost. And as a result of all of this, it becomes so confusing and disorientating to listen to. It pulls you into that darkness once again that the whole album's been presenting to us, and it pushes that depressing, empty and hollow atmosphere once again. And I think this is a fascinating track, and for some reason it's one of my favourites off of this strange album, but I struggle to actually place what about this song is drawing me into it. I think there's just something, fascinating about that deluge of electronic beats and swells that further pushes the macabre and darkness. It just results in something that's, very just unique and just fascinating, before it all just ends in pure silence. Moving swiftly along, we do get the next track of Meshes. This one features a sort of distorted opener of just static it feels, before an incredibly menacing beat of sorts begins, before then introducing a distorted roar that, kind of feels like, a ray from hell, maybe. And this one is so weird to me. It kind of just sounds like, intense 2 a.m. club music, but one that is so distorted, by the perception of whatever dark and dangerous narcotic has influenced the situation. As though someone has handed you something, you've taken it, and now you are just devolving into the worst of everything as your mind just formulates the darkness and horror of everything. To me, this particular track, though, it's interesting as many elements of the electronic music feature themselves here, it feels. So from previously mentioned beats to even little distorting effects that pull vocal samples into these incredibly weird shapes before kind of falling back into stuttering drones and hollow beats once more. It's weird because it feels like at times across these various tracks it's adhering to electronic music in some respects, but it then deconstructs it, of course, into just these weird elements of it, and it's incredibly playful and experimental, but in a way that's so it just gets right under your skin. It feels a very fascinating track that really makes me uncomfortable every time I hear it. And so our next track of Remote Heaven, this once again just further pushes the confusion, the complete breakdown of sense, place and time as empty beats push along at such an odd pace. As you kind of get intermittent vocals, and rising drones in the far background, just rising and doing their thing. And it feels to me like this one, it's all build up, but none of that release, and instead of that climax that you kind of aim for in some electronic music, kind of like those big drops you get in dubstep, I guess, which to be fair is not really a genre I'm into that much, but when you're listening to that kind of electronic music, it's what you're looking for. But here, instead of it doing that sort of, it does that kind of build-up thing, but it doesn't have any of that, that joy that you get from the kind of thing, and instead it just delves back into moments of minimalism, and or just the same motifs that started off this very track. And it's though you think you're able to escape the horrifying landscape that you inhabited, only find you're still there in amongst all the danger and the turmoil of those very weird back alleys. And it feels so uncomfortable, so unsettling in this dirty, grimy place, that offers no safety, but instead it just raises the hair on the back of your neck as you anticipate the absolute worst coming in from out of the darkness, it feels. And so we continue along to We Were Wrong. So this track, very bizarre, I feel, but the whole thing is, don't get me wrong, but this one in particular, it's another sort of distorted deluge of electronics and frequencies and peculiar beats. Surprise, surprise. But before you're then given such a surprising little melody, though, that kind of sounds like something medieval or baroque in terms of the tune itself, if you can call it a tune. And it once again distorts the reality that the album is presenting, further expressing that turmoil, that unsettlement, that confusion, that chaos almost. But what I like is how all of the various motifs that present themselves from time to time in this track, from loops to intermittent moments, they all seem to just interplay in amongst each other the more this one progresses though, showing us the peculiar interactions of these sounds and beats that never falls into anything comfortable for even a moment, even when you get those momentary breaks. And it's interesting because it still finds ways to just unsettle you as the melody becomes reversed and distorted towards the end, for example. It's incredibly unpredictable, which is perhaps one of the main factors of this album and the experiences that it's presenting, that you kind of just have to strap yourself in, let the narrative take you on its rather unusual and rather scary journey. And so, the next track? Don't know. No, this does nothing to relieve the tension that this album has given us, like the whole thing. Nothing is gonna relieve the tension. We just have to experience the whole thing. And this one establishes beats once again to start it off with, before you get rather squelchy, uncomfortable electronic effects that slowly build up towards nothing, before changing the scene into something much darker and, denser it feels, as you get distorted vocal samples and very hollow, empty little monologic tunes far away in the background. I like how this one, though, it kind of has that kick drum thing in there in the background as well, though, and it kind of pushes itself along before just interrupting itself with rather peculiar time signatures. Very bizarre track. Oddly enough, it feels to me like, though, even with that sort of arrhythmic pattern of the beats, though, this is perhaps one of the more coherent of all the tracks, but I feel like that's only in context of electronic music itself, which this album just seems to be warping, distorting and deconstructing anyway, turning it into this menacing and unnatural story. Doesn't make any sense at all, though, does it? But yeah, weirdly enough, though, this one, it actually kind of reminds me a little bit of Aphex Twin's Window Licker, though, at times, but more weirdly enough, a more menacing, uncomfortable version that has no humour or respite in it. And it never devolves into those huge electronic moments that Window Licker does, especially towards the end of that particular track. I love that sort of really intense, heavy part it does. This never does that though. This one just only offers us the hollow, the empty, the abstract, and just that uncomfortableness. But it makes it so fascinating to me, the fact that it presents it so easily. So we then get another short track. We get the next track of Peaked, which just throws us into a smorgasbord of tones, drones, before once again delving into interference and distortion and frequencies, creating such a skewed vision that resembles just nothing in the haze of static that it presents. I find that this is perhaps, the very point of the album, though, where I'm perhaps the most sort of overloaded by the entire experience, and it's very, my very awareness of what I'm experiencing at this particular point in the album. This is perhaps where it becomes as very distorted as the music itself, and it's here I fail to actually see the details that could, the particular details of it all, because it just flies past so quickly in their very blurred forms that it's almost as like they barely occurred at all. But I think there's something interesting about that, though, especially the narrative of this album, getting up to this particular point, though, we're approaching the end of it now, and by this point it's just so overloading, so overwhelming, and it's just so weird, though. We do get the penultimate track of the album next, though, the next track of It's Ritual. More beats, more intense, structureless, and just uncomfortable, intimidating sounds once again. I feel like so much of this album is just a presentation of the uncomfortable menacing vibe, as I've mentioned, and as mentioned, being slipped a pill of God knows what, and just finding yourself wandering the dangerous streets in the dead of night as the faces of everyone around you just look like monsters as you find yourself drawn to the lights and colours of those dirty underground squat raves. It's just part of the very image this album presents to me. And it's observing, and all those that you see are just observing and sneering and judging you as your mind just climbs in and around itself in all this confusion and terrifying existential crisis as the effects just take over and distort your very reality in such a way that nothing makes sense and you only see the horror of everything. And it's all you want to do is just, retreat into some safe place, but there is just danger lurking around every single corner, and all that's happening is you're just finding yourself further pulled into that rabbit hole of terror. It's kind of an explanation of how this very album feels to me, of what it makes me think and feel about, and maybe that's why it just feels so uncomfortable, because it's such a nasty vibe, but it does it so well. As mentioned, it presents it so perfectly, so effortlessly, so easily almost, and it's really unique and fascinating film. So we do get to the final track, Percressing, I believe it's called. I might be saying that wrong. Yeah, final track, of course, does nothing to alleviate anything. This one, you do kind of get a bit of a melody, sort of, but melody in context of this very album, though, one that is kind of ascending and descending, accompanied by beats once again. But then it changes the scene by just being louder and more intimidating. And it's though we have finally found our final resting place. We are fallen in amongst the cardboard boxes, by the dustbins in the very back alleys here. And all you can do is just, sit there hyperventilating as, you just, wait out the very terrible effects of these narcotics as they just try to wear off and bring us back to reality. That's if you can even find your way there, though. It's almost as though this is all that's going to be, this is like, are we stuck here forever almost kind of thing. And that's how I feel at this point in the album. Completely overloaded, completely overwhelmed, terrified, but fascinated as well. But yeah, it's a very interesting closer for this entire thing, though, because it presents very much those same vibes, almost ending the album as menacingly as the entire thing began, as though, the entire thing, that's all there is. There is only distortion and weirdness, grime and macabre nature to it all. And it's really fascinating me to that weird narrative of sorts, how it presents itself across the entire thing. And so, essentially, yeah, we have covered all the tracks on this album. It's a really interesting one, though, because although I do enjoy, some electronic music, probably the more minimal side of things, or the more ambient drone side of things, but like just, pure club electronic music, or whatever you want to call this, I don't really know. It's not a genre I know a lot about. I do adore the music of Aphex Twin stuff, but, not a genre I've really gone and checked out. So all I can really go on when I'm listening to stuff like this is just how it makes me feel. And as you know, as I've mentioned, this one makes me feel really uncomfortable, like I'm just scared of the setting we've been thrown into. And to me, it then, as a result, it just becomes a rather dark expression of the more dangerous facets of the human experience, of just almost taking things too far, and finding yourself not just lost in place, but also in time, and in your own head, as your anxiety just distorts the very reality around you, only showcasing and even exaggerating the worst parts of what you think it is you're perceiving. But as uncomfortable as that is, I think that's amazing that the music presents that to us, or to me, and especially the way it makes me feel that. And as a result, I think it's one of the most fascinating electronic albums I've come across, though, or had the fortune to come across, thanks to our recommendation, of course. It's just everything just feels so empty, hollow, grimy, twisted, sterile, and just lacking in any warmth, and instead just revels in how scary and cold everything is, and just presents to us the super warped perspective of everything. And the way as well, this album just uses the use of beats, just forms so much of the album, of course, but it's also skewed and broken in amongst just indiscernible amongst the chaos of electronics that form the rest of the tracks, it feels. It results in something so unique, even though it's so incredibly terrifying. And I think it's one of, just as I mentioned, one of the more fascinating electronic albums I've had the fortune to come across. And once again, pretty much all of our suggested albums for this show, I'm very grateful to have been introduced to stuff like this, because this is kind of the thing I probably wouldn't have come across by myself. I do love to check out as much music as I can in my own time. That is why the Weird Music series is just full of the weirdest albums, because I'm always listening to stuff. Something like this I don't think I would have come across, though, if it hadn't been introduced to me. And that is why I really like doing these, end of month shows where we just go to the randomiser, because then I have a reason to check out something that I would otherwise normally do. And so many of the albums that you've all been suggesting, just incredibly unique headspaces, that they all introduce. And this one as well, especially, is just so unique in expressing the story through the music, and You know, it makes me feel things that are just outside the norm of conventional music. And that's what I love about it. And so, yeah, it's just, in a way, yeah, just a huge thank you to all of you just for suggesting music like this. And, you know, but yeah, before we get ahead of us, yeah, I think we'll just come to the end of our episode of Weird Music there. Definitely a weird one, no doubt, but yeah, one that fascinates me though, especially with how easily it just got under my skin and just made me so, ooh. Like all the absolute worst facets of club music in this hazy, incredibly hazy and distorted drug trip through the back alleys. Not something you might want to go for, but it's unique and it does it incredibly well. So yeah, to be fair, I always think that's the sign of incredibly good art in my opinion, though, just a perfect expression of intent. So yeah, a huge thanks to Indigoblur for their suggestion on this one. Definitely up there as one of the more weirdest things I've heard now as a result of this show, so yep, I think that's very cool. So yep, do keep these suggestions coming, because I adore the variety of the kind of music we're getting from the randomizer. So yep, just keep them coming, we'll see what we can do. We will try our best to get through one a week. It might be yours next month, who knows. But yeah, I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music. I wish you all the best, take care, and bye bye for now. Bye bye.